one of the things I've done has given me more satisfaction, more pleasure than anything else was donating a kidney to another person and having a transformative impact on the life of that person. And I would have to say it's the most meaningful thing I've ever done in my life.
Hello and welcome to the Beautiful Work Podcast. I am your host, Dan Krikorian. Each episode we feature a special guest from all walks of life, and we ask them to explore the ins and outs, the ups and downs, the trials and the triumphs in their chosen field. Writers, musicians, coaches, business owners, and everything in between. We peel back the curtain to hear their stories, to walk their paths, to find out how they breathe life into their beautiful work. Well, hello everybody, and welcome to those of you new to the Beautiful Work Podcast. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I have a very special guest today, Dr. James Doti, President Emeritus of Chapman University. I am a longtime fan of Dr. Doti. I am a two-time graduate of Chapman University, and I currently work there as well as a men's basketball coach and adjunct professor in the leadership department and the School of Communication. And so Dr. Doti, to get a chance to sit down with him is a big honor for me. Before we get to the show, the Beautiful Work Podcast, we kicked off season 2 with Whiskey Week, which was a 5-part documentary style podcast look at the whiskey and bourbon industry in the United States. It was 5 straight episodes featuring 5 different people within the bourbon and whiskey industry: historians, writers, podcasters, businessmen, master distillers, filmmakers, bartenders. There's a lot of people on all the episodes, and to kind of give you a 360 look at the bourbon and whiskey industry. And I learned a ton and had a lot of fun putting it together. And so please make sure you go and check all those out. You can go and find those episodes as well as all the past episodes on my website, dankrikorian.com or beautifulworkpodcast.com. It takes you to the same spot. While you're there, please make sure to sign up for the newsletter and check out my music as well. I have 5 records out, and all of those records are on the website as well as on iTunes and Spotify and things like that. And speaking of music, one last announcement. I started a songwriter showcase in downtown Orange at the 1888 Center in September, and we had a great first show featuring 4 wonderful songwriters from Southern California, and we're doing it again November 15th at the 1888 Center, 7 o'clock in downtown Orange, the Orange Circle there. It's a great spot, a beautiful listening room. We had about 55, 60 people for the first show, and it's a great place to come and hear some great songwriters and just have a great night of music. And so you can get tickets for that at the 1888 Center's website, which is heritagefuture.org. And hope to see you there. All right. Can't wait to bring you Dr. Doti's story. So without further ado, let's get to the show. Dr. Jim Doti is the President Emeritus and current Professor of Economics at Chapman University in Orange, California. Dr. Doti was appointed President of Chapman University in 1991 and held the position for 25 years. Over the course of his tenure as president, Doti helped foster and grow a small mom-and-pop college in downtown Orange into a nationally recognized university known for its high academics, breathtaking campus, and vibrant student and faculty community. During his time at Chapman, Doti founded the Anderson Center for Economic Research. The center presented its first annual economic forecast in December of 1978 and was the first economic forecast in the U.S. based on an urban econometric model. The economic forecast has continued to be a main focus of the Anderson Center's work, growing in scope and widely recognized for its statistical accuracy. Over the 2004 through 2014 period, Chapman's real GDP forecasts were more accurate than the forecasts issued by all 30 agencies participating in the Blue Chip Economic Indicator surveys. The Chapman forecast model also outperformed the highly regarded Blue Chip consensus forecast. Besides his work as president and economic forecaster, Dr. Doti has completed 60 marathons, climbed 5 of the world's famed 7 summits, is an avid reader and writer, and his first children's book, A Christmas Adventure in Little Italy, was published in 2010 and became a Sons of Italy book club selection. His second, Jimmy Finds His Voice, came out in January 2013, and final installment of the Jimmy Trilogy in 2017. Dr. Doti is here today to discuss the people who shaped him as a person and leader, his most difficult night as a president, and how he maintained his passion, vigor, and perspective over the course of his career. Welcome to the Beautiful Work Podcast. I am joined now by Dr. Jim Doti, former president of Chapman University. Dr. Doti, thanks so much for being on the show this afternoon.
Well, thank you, Dan. It's great to be on the show.
Well, it is an honor to have you on. And I want to start off, you are someone that has run 60 or more marathons. You've climbed to the top of some of the tallest mountains in the world. You've written children's books. But are there any other hobbies outside of the many that you have that perhaps people don't know about?
Well, I don't know. The press is usually on me all the time, and I'm not sure that they know that I'm the son of immigrant parents. Both my mom and dad were born in Italy, so I'm a first-generation American.
That is very interesting. I also read somewhere that you make your own wooden bowls. You have a studio at your house, and you make these really great wooden bowls.
Well, yeah, I guess you really researched me carefully. I do make wooden bowls, and I still do. It's a great hobby. I find it very interesting. I started about 5 years ago. I always liked working with wood, and I happened to see a video on TV of a guy making a wood bowl where you put a chunk of wood on a lathe and make a bowl out of it. And it looked like fun, so I took some lessons online, and I would watch those lessons while I run on my treadmill in the morning. I do a lot of that, training for marathons and so on. So it wasn't too long before I learned the basics and started making bowls. And just recently, I completed bowl number 100. I sign and number them.
Wow.
That's why I know there are 100 out there.
That's great. Yeah, I found an article online about you making that, and that sounds like such a neat passion, and obviously something that you've had success in over the past few years. And speaking of your background as well, so you are originally from Chicago, and so I know as a sports fan that city's pretty much divided between Chicago Cubs fans or Chicago White Sox fans. Do you fall on either side of that line?
Yeah, I was raised in the northwest side of Chicago, not too far from Wrigley Field, so that puts me down as a Cubbies fan.
Okay.
But unlike a lot of my friends who either hated the White Sox and loved the Cubs and vice versa, I like both of our hometown teams. In fact, I grew up during the 50s when the White Sox were the Go-Go Sox and actually won a pennant in 1959, losing the World Series to the Dodgers.
Wow.
That year.
Well, the Cubs have had some recent success, a little bit more than the White Sox for baseball.
Yeah.
That's good. You're on both sides. Well, good. Well, thanks for sharing some of that background stuff. If you could, I'd like to go back now. 1991, you're appointed president of Chapman University. Do you remember what the first few weeks were like on the job for you?
Yeah, it was scary. It was intimidating. It was a period, though, where I decided I wouldn't be making major decisions or recommendations to the Board of Trustees and the faculty until I kind of got a lay of the land and some ideas about what people were thinking. So it was kind of scary in that I realized that it was an enormous responsibility, but at least I toned it down because I decided not to make any major recommendations or major changes in the way we were doing things. So I was on a learning curve, obviously, and being on that learning curve was somewhat intimidating, but not as bad as it otherwise would be if I were in a situation where I had to make gut-wrenching decisions right away.
Sure. So did you feel like you were ready for the job when you took over, or was it with some trepidation at first?
No, Dan, I never, in all the 25 years I served as president, I never thought I was quite ready. I would wake up in the morning and I would ask myself, I'm president of Chapman University.
Right.
My goodness, that's kind of scary. And who made me that? And how in the world did anybody think I could do the job? So yeah, I was never quite I never reached a point where I said, "Oh, I finally arrived and I have all the skills that are necessary." I always felt a bit intimidated by the job. I should tell you though that I should have felt somewhat prepared because prior to becoming president, I served Chapman University for almost 2 years as acting president. I served once when our previous president went on sabbatical. He came back. I returned to the faculty. And then he resigned, and I became acting president again, at which time I became a candidate for the presidency. I didn't get the job. The Board of Trustees decided that it would be better for Chapman to hire someone who had more experience as a sitting president, and they brought in someone who had served as president of another university for 12 years. So again, I went back to the faculty, and 2 years later, that presidency didn't work out too well, and I was again asked to serve as president. So I had a lot of years serving as president, but an acting president is not like a sitting president. An acting president, you just try to keep things moving along and not do anything that might significantly change the direction of the university. You're not an acting president. You're not expected to come up with a new vision for the university or major transformational changes. Just kind of keep things going. But at the same time, it gave me some experience working with the board of trustees and working with the faculty and getting to know the lay of the land.
Well, that's great. And I did not know that you had those couple of test runs almost before officially taking over.
Yeah.
Now, Chapman has transformed, as you know very well, greatly over the past 25 years. And specifically, when you took over as president, are there people or who are some of the people that helped you kind of shift the momentum into what it's become today?
Oh, yeah, there were a number of people. First of all, I had a great senior staff, vice presidents who work with me. I never really made decisions on my own. I would consult with the vice presidents, with the faculty chair. But there was one person in particular who really stood out in terms of being my mentor, a person who gave me a lot of advice and guidance, supported me along the way. And that person is George Ardress, who is serving as chairman of the Board of Trustees. As president, of course, I report to the board directly. I'm hired and could be fired by the board as well. The chairman of the board is George Ardress, and At the time, he was CEO of Arnell, a real estate company, but he was also a major entrepreneur in terms of his stature in the community, being a pillar of the community. And I worked closely with him. He loved Chapman. He's a graduate of Chapman. So we were a team, yin and yang. And I don't think I'm sure we could not have accomplished what we did at Chapman if it weren't for George's guidance and all the help he gave me over the years.
Now, over the years, I know you've worked closely with many people like George that have brought the university to where it is today. But in your 25 years as the president, were there any major projects or developments that you had to let go of, that you really wanted to get done but had to let go for a variety of reasons?
Yeah, when I became president, I had those 2 periods where I was serving as acting president, but more importantly, I had been on the faculty since 1974. So I had basically been almost 20 years at Chapman by the time I became the sitting president. And over those years, I really formed some ideas and came up with, I thought, a new vision for the university that I hoped would resonate with the Board of Trustees and with the faculty. And it's this, and it was this change that really guided me for the next, and the university for the next 25 years. And that is, during the time I was a member of the faculty, we were basically an open admission school. We really prided ourselves on the fact that we would bring students in, different backgrounds, different levels of preparedness to do well in college.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't really have expectations regarding SAT scores or GPAs. We would bring them in and hope that we had the kind of environment at Chapman that would transform them and help them succeed. When I became president, I'm a statistician. I'm an econometrician. So I look at numbers. I love numbers. I think numbers tell a story. And while we had this vision at the time that we would bring in different kinds of students and we would graduate them, our actual graduation record was abysmal. Our graduation rate was only about 35%. In other words, if a student came in as a freshman, there's only a 35% probability that student would actually graduate from Chapman. 2 things would happen generally. They'd either flunk out or they would transfer to another school. So the major change that I wanted to push for and that I really believed in passionately, that really helped drive me and the university for the next 25 years was that we would become a more selective school, not just to become more selective, but to make the academic environment at Chapman more exciting, more vibrant, electric in terms of being a place of energy and ideas and research and a learning community that really was exciting and the kind of environment that would induce students and faculty, the best and brightest of those, to come to Chapman. So that meant that we needed to be more selective and all of a sudden have an expectation regarding SATs, GPAs, so that the students we were bringing in were better prepared to be part of that environment that we were hoping to create at Chapman University. And I'll give you one example of how that helps one make decisions, sometimes very difficult decisions. I'm telling you now, probably the most controversial decision was early on in my presidency. To attract these students that we wanted, we needed to provide scholarship funds, not only for need, but in this case, academic merit. If you had a high SAT, GPA, we would basically give you a scholarship. We didn't have funds for that purpose. We didn't have an endowment of any sizable nature to help us do that. So we didn't have any money. So I was trying to figure out where would I get with scholarship funding to attract these students. And at the time, we were a Division I, Division II athletic program giving athletic scholarships.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized that if we moved from Division I, II to Division III, which is no athletic scholarship, we would be able to transfer the athletic scholarships to academic merit scholarships, which we did. And we call those presidential scholars. And it helped us begin attracting the kind of student body that would then in turn attract the best and brightest faculty and help us build this exciting, vibrant community that we were hoping to build. But that was controversial. I had to deal with irate coaches and parents who were really invested in the status quo and wanted and any change from that was threatening to them. And as a result, they reacted negatively, and there was controversy. But sure. I knew that if we really aspired to this vision, we would have to make difficult decisions along the way. That turned out to be one of many.
Sure.
But this is an example of where your vision helps you fight the fight and decide on those battles that are important if you're going to reach the vision that you and the rest of the community have adopted for Chapman.
It's interesting you brought up the move from Division II, Division I to Division III. There was a letter that you sent out when my former boss, athletic director Dave Curry, retired. And in that letter to the university, when he retired, you mentioned that one of the most difficult nights in your presidency was when you had to stand in front of a group of angry parents and let them know that Chapman was moving from a Division II to a Division III. Do you remember the specifics of that night with Dave Curry when you're in front of him?
I sure do. And Dan, let me applaud you. You've really done your homework. Yes, there was. I'll never forget that. It was an example of a tough. I had to walk over from the president's office to Hutton Center, which is where the parents had congregated. And they were out to lynch me. They were so upset because they figured their kids are going to go from the Chapman baseball to pro ball, and I was taking the rug out from under them. And I'll never forget, as I walked over, I felt like I assume, or that I gathered Gary Cooper felt in the movie High Noon when he was walking down the streets of this town to meet his fate. And that's kind of how I felt. And it was tough. I mean, parents were crying and upset, and it's difficult when you change things. Change is difficult. People are most comfortable with the status quo. But if it's for something that is important, if it's something that's critical to where you want to move an institution, you'll fight the fight because it's worth it.
And you've been someone that I've known you from being a student, and then I've worked at Chapman the last 7 years, and you always have this vigor, personal vigor about you, at least publicly, when you're meeting people and speaking to people. And with the amount of decisions that you have to make, like you just talked about with having to move to Division III, and I'm sure there were thousands upon thousands that you made in the 25 years that were difficult. How did you personally keep things equal and being able to still have that energy and that drive with all those decisions you had to make constantly?
Yeah, that's a great question, Dan. I think most people are, it's not just being a president of a university, but anyone who is a leader, and you don't have to be a CEO to be a leader. A leader is basically a change agent, someone who brings about constructive change. And it's stressful. As I said, people would rather, they're more comfortable with the status quo. Being a change agent breaks that, and it's threatening and difficult. And that's why I got into running, marathoning. I would get up in the morning and do my training for a marathon and put on my iPod my iPod and listen to music or listen to audible.com and get my mind away from that. And I think everybody has to do that. Thankfully, I have a wonderful family. I have 2 children and a wonderful wife, very, very supportive. So all of those things help. Climbing mountains was another thing. I would climb mountains with my son. That involves a lot of training, and they're difficult challenges. To run a marathon is not easy.
No.
I ran 60 of them, and not one of them ever was easy. At least for me. Maybe it is for some people, and it took a lot of training. But it helped me, I think, balance my life, my business, my educational, my Chapman concerns and responsibilities with a balance of private kinds of things, keeping your body in shape. I can't stress enough the fact that running and climbing mountains help me be healthier than I otherwise would be, and as a result, you're able to deal with more stress and more responsibilities, and the number of hours that one was required to give to the university in terms of speeches, attending events, going to plays and fundraisers, and all of the rest of it. You have to be in good shape, and thankfully, these other pursuits help in that regard.
It's spring of 2003, and I'm sitting at a fancy table in Newport Beach, California, at a small scholarship award ceremony. A few weeks earlier, I had made the big decision to attend Chapman University to play basketball and continue my studies, and this scholarship was a huge help in making that dream a reality. So my parents and I were excited and surprised to see that the guest speaker for the event was the current president of Chapman University, Jim Doti. I know that Jim Doti has given thousands of speeches in his career, and at a certain point, they probably started all running together. But his talk that day lit a fire in me about the future, both of my own and of the university that I was heading to. He spoke of the upcoming upgrades to the campus, the vision for the next decade, the rise in the academic national rankings, and the national championship that the Chapman baseball team had just won. And when he shook my hand afterward, he told me how excited he was that I was coming to be a Chapman Panther. Jim Doti is no doubt as smart, savvy, and forward-thinking as they come. But I think those who have had the chance to know and work with him during his time at Chapman understand that the secret sauce is in the way he made me feel that day, 16 years ago, as a wide-eyed, spiky-haired high schooler. His ability to inspire, motivate, and lead people is how he took a small university into national prominence. And his unrelenting pursuit of the vision of what Chapman could be has had a lasting effect on the ethos of the university as a whole. As Henry David Thoreau said, "If one advances confidently in the direction of his dreams and endeavors to live the life which he has imagined, he will meet with success unexpected in common hours." Did you ever think or have an opportunity to leave Chapman?
Oh yeah, I got a lot of offers to be president, or letters of interest. Could you put your hat in the ring for this or that position? And And you can't help but look at them and wonder about what it would be like. But
What made you stay?
because there were so many exciting things going on at Chapman and so many possibilities. Wherever I was in those 25 years, there was always something in the next 2 years. We've got to get this thing done. We've got to get this building built. We've got to establish this new school. We've got to aspire to this increase in our U.S. News and World Report ranking. And those things were so exciting. I didn't want to leave them. They were,
right.
They just, I was just having too much fun. And those challenges are fun along the way. And I didn't want to leave in the middle of those things.
When you look at Chapman now, and where it's going, do you see, Chapman's future the same way that you saw Chapman's future when you were president?
Yeah. Thankfully, Dan, as I was getting towards 25 years, probably around year 22, 23, I said, it's really time. 25 years is way more than, I think the average presidency now is around 6 or 7 years. And I thought, and I was reaching an age and a point in my life where I decided that I want to go back to teaching. All of a sudden, I started thinking, gee, teaching sounds a lot more, doing research, teaching, getting back into economics, statistics, econometrics, started to sound like more fun than being president. And that's not good. If there's something else that sounds more fun than what you're doing, that's not a good sign. So I decided this is a good time to prepare for the transition. Thankfully, I had a wonderful provost I was working with for 13 years at Chapman, who is in large part responsible for all of our accomplishments during my presidency. And that, of course, was Daniele Strupa. Mm-hmm. And I went to the Board of Trustees and said, I'm going to give it 2 years to get to the 25th year. And during that time, I'm going to work very, very closely with Daniele to hit the ground running so that when that 25th year is over, Daniele will become president. I asked the board to select Daniele as presidential designate during that period. And that helped this transition. It's difficult for an institution, for a long-serving president to leave because everybody's kind of used to that person. And so that's why I thought it was particularly important for there to be a smooth transition at Chapman. And because of that 2-year period where I worked closely with Daniele, introducing him to board members, and even letting him take over our senior staff at our senior staff meetings, it was a very smooth transition. And most of the leadership that was in place in terms of that senior staff are still in place now. And we work so closely together that that vision of Chapman having this vibrant, exciting, educational vibrant hasn't changed. Mm-hmm. And the way to get there hasn't changed. So we're still on, I think, the same kind of forward trajectory. And thankfully, because of Daniele's leadership, I think that trajectory is even on a more positive slope right now.
Well, he's certainly doing a great job. And I know Chapman has moved this year from the regional rankings to now the national rankings. Academically, which is a big step, as you very much know.
There is one thing I want to mention, if I could make a plug, and that is after I left the presidency, went back to teaching and research. Number one, people say, "Aren't you bored?" And no way. No matter what position you're in, you can be a leader, and I try to do that as a faculty member, change things, and try to incorporate things in a class that may never have been tried before. Our Chapman model, our forecast, really came about as a result of my teaching econometrics and trying to make that course more interesting. But one thing I did that probably would not have been able to do as president was to donate a kidney of mine to someone who I didn't know. But I mention this only because it turned out to be so simple. I mean, very little discomfort. I did it on a Monday. I was back teaching without missing one class. I ran a 5K 3 weeks later and a half marathon about a month later. So it was very simple. So if anyone's listening, I think one of the things I've done that has given me more satisfaction, more pleasure than anything else was was donating a kidney to another person and having a transformative impact on the life of that person. And I just encourage other people to at least think about doing it. The way it's done now is so straightforward. I feel it was. I did it 6 months ago. I feel better now than I did when I had two kidneys.
Yeah, and I did read that story while I was preparing for it, and it's an amazing story. And I guess just what was the backstory as to why you wanted to do this?
I had a very good friend, Heidi Miller, who decided to do that. She donated a kidney, it turns out, to another friend of mine, and I saw that he was he was in final stage renal failure. He was on dialysis for like 10 years, and he didn't have long to live, quite frankly. As a result of this donation, the quality of life was transformed. He didn't have to go to dialysis anymore, and he didn't have this terminal, illness anymore. He was able to live a normal life. And I thought, wow. And I saw Heidi, and it didn't seem like she had to go through very much pain or any significant sacrifice on her part. And yet, for a small little something, you have this enormous impact on the quality of another person's life. So I thought, gee, it's an easy decision. Thankfully, I was healthy enough to do it. You have to be very healthy. Mm-hmm. So I went through a zillion tests, but thankfully I qualified. And I would have to say it's the most meaningful thing I've ever done in my life.
Wow, that's great.
And I encourage others to think about it. If they're fortunate enough to be healthy to do it, then look into it. Just call someone. I did at UCI Hospital. Just call someone at UCI in the transplant section, and they can go through all the information you'll need to make an informed decision.
Wow, that's great.
Something very exciting. This has just come about in the last couple of days. The person who I gave the kidney to, I didn't know. I met him after the surgery, and great guy. And he was again in final stage renal failure. Didn't have long to live, and now I've convinced him to train for a half marathon.
Oh, wow.
That we're going to do on the year anniversary of our surgery, hopefully to promote giving of kidneys, because what we need more live donors.
That's great. Well, we'll look forward to that, seeing you guys do that together, definitely. What's one of the best investments that you've made in your career?
Well, geez, there's so many, and they're never financial. The investments you make as a father, for example, and the joys you get from seeing your kids grow up, and doing it in a partnership with a loving wife, that certainly has to be right there at the top. It's an investment. Not easy to be a parent. There are all kinds of trials and tribulations, and yet the satisfaction of being a father and a husband, is incredible payoff. The investment with friends, having friends takes time, and I talked with you about my friendship with George Argers. I would not have been the person I am if it weren't for the fact that I had such a good friend as George Argers. I'll tell you about this other friend that I had at Chapman University. He was our version of Mr. Chips at Chapman. His name was Paul Delp. He had taught at Chapman like forever, since the 1920s. He's no longer with us. But when he was alive and I was a faculty member, we became good friends. When George Argers called me and said that the Board of Trustees had decided to ask you to serve as Chapman's president, and this was the time was permanent, the sitting president, it was scary. I told you before at the beginning of the show that I was scared. One of the first persons I decided to talk with was Paul Delp, and so I went over to his house, and Paul, Mr. Argers has asked me to serve as president of Chapman. It's scary. I'm really scared. What advice would you give me? And he said, Jim, just treat everyone you meet with respect and dignity, and you'll do just fine. And I don't know, that was one of the best advice I've ever received in my lifetime. But it wouldn't have happened if I didn't have friends that I nurtured over the years, that I sought out and invested time with. So, isn't it interesting you asked that question, Dan? What are the best investments? They always turn out to be people.
Yeah, that's great. And I ask every guest on this show that same question, and 90% of them talk about time invested with people and people they love, and I loved hearing you talk about that. I know you've got to go here in a second. I want to ask you one final question as we wrap up, and it goes back to the farewell message and email that you sent to the university back in September of 2016 before you left and passed the baton. And in the letter, you expressed that the need for universities in the future to continue to have the right freedom of speech without retribution, and that the university as a whole and society should remain a unique place to be able to do that. Why was it so important for you to leave that message as you were passing the baton on to Daniele Struppa?
Yeah, I thought long and hard about that, and it's because of a concern I have with what's going on in our society, and particularly in higher education. We're going through an era where there's increased resistance to free speech because sometimes speaking hurts others, and there's an attitude that students shouldn't be confronted or their feelings hurt. They need to have safe spaces away from the tough, cruel world of arguing ideas. Arguing ideas and thoughts should be brutal. It's a tough game. It's when you're really passionate about what you believe in, you're willing to fight the fight and discuss that. But you need to do it in an environment where you can say these things without retribution, where it's not you don't have to send a trigger warning that I'm going to say something that may hurt you. I think in higher education, we shouldn't have trigger warnings or hurt feelings. We should be resilient to new ideas and thoughts that may be repugnant, that may seem hurtful, but the only way to search for truth is or the optimal way to search for truth is to have the ability to speak your mind and engage in ideas without fear that you're going to say something that is going to be interpreted incorrectly. Because as soon as that happens, that inhibits free speech and it inhibits the search for truth.
Well, thank you. As we wrap up, thank you. It's been a pleasure to have you on and hear your thoughts. And I just want to say thank you personally, as well as someone who's a double Chapman graduate, my undergrad as well as my grad degree, and also now coaching and teaching. And so for all that you've done, really do thank you. It's amazing to have been a part of all of it. And thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you, Dan. It's been a pleasure. And let me thank you for all you do to reflect credit on your alma mater.
Well, that was such a fun episode, and we thank Dr. Jim Doti for coming on and sharing all his thoughts about leadership and Chapman and life, and it was a pleasure to have him on the show. Please make sure to subscribe to the newsletter on dankrikorian.com or beautifulworkpodcast.com. Follow us on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you listen to podcasts, and we hope to see you again soon. So whatever you're doing, wherever you are, keep making that beautiful work. We'll see you next time.